The last thing Nora Blackwood remembered was the deafening roar of twisted metal and the acrid smell of burning circuits. Now consciousness returned slowly, bringing with it a symphony of pain that made her wish she could slip back into the merciful darkness. Her head throbbed with each heartbeat, and when she tried to move, sharp agony lanced through her left shoulder. Blinking against the strange amber light filtering through the smoke, Nora struggled to focus her vision. The Aurora's dream lay in ruins around her, its sleek hull now a grotesque sculpture of bent alloy and shattered viewports. What had once been the pride of the Intergalactic Research Consortium was now scattered across an alien landscape like the bones of some massive beast. "Status report," she croaked automatically, her training as a xenobiologist overriding the shock. When no response came, the horrible reality began to settle in. The bridge was empty, except for debris and the ominous silence of dead systems. Nora forced herself to stand, swaying as vertigo threatened to topple her. Her research station was completely destroyed, years of work on interspecies genetic compatibility reduced to sparking ruins. Through a gaping hole in the hull, she could see the alien world that had become their prison. Endless rolling hills covered in silvery vegetation, beneath a sky the color of old copper. "Hello?" She called out, her voice echoing strangely in the wreckage. "Is anyone alive?" A sound from the navigation section made her heart leap. Stumbling over twisted metal and fallen ceiling panels, she made her way toward it. There, pinned beneath a collapsed support beam, was Kethvar, the ship's Zelfarian navigator. The 7-foot-tall humanoid was conscious but clearly in pain. His normally luminous blue skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and the delicate bill-like structures along his neck fluttered rapidly, a sign of distress in his species. His large, dark eyes met hers with an expression that seemed almost relieved. "Nora Blackwood," he said in his melodic accent, each syllable precisely pronounced. "I had hoped others survived." "Just us, it seems," she replied grimly, examining the beam that trapped him. It was heavy, but not impossibly so. "Can you feel your legs?" Kethvar's secondary arms, smaller appendages that emerged from his torso, flexed experimentally. "Yes, the beam merely has me pinned, not crushed." Working together, they managed to free him. Kethvar stood slowly, his natural grace compromised by obvious pain. At his full height, he towered over Nora's modest 5'6" frame, but she had worked with Zelfarians before and wasn't intimidated by the size difference. "We need to assess our situation," Nora said, falling into the practical mindset that had served her well during her years studying alien ecosystems. "Do you know anything about this planet?" Kethvar's elongated fingers danced over his damaged navigation console, coaxing a few sparks of life from the dying systems. "Kepler 442c, he said after a moment. "Marginally habitable. The atmospheric composition will support human life, though the oxygen content is slightly lower than Earth standard. Day cycle is approximately 37 Earth hours." "What about rescue?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Kethvar's people were naturally diplomatic, but Nora had learned to read their subtle expressions during their months of working together. The slight droop of his shoulders, the way his secondary arms folded closer to his body, he was delivering bad news as gently as possible. "The Aurora's dream was operating under deep space protocols," he said finally. "Our next scheduled check-in is not for 6 months. When we fail to report, it will take time to organize a search. This system is remote." Nora closed her eyes, processing the implications. 6 months minimum before anyone would even know they were missing. Add search time, and they could be looking at a year or more before rescue arrived, if it came at all. "Then we survive," she said simply. "Together." Something flickered in Kethvar's dark eyes at that word. During their time aboard the ship, their relationship had been strictly professional. Selfarians were naturally reserved, and interspecies interactions were carefully regulated by both their governments. But now, with no protocols or regulations, to guide them, they would have to forge a new kind of partnership. The next few hours passed in a blur of salvage work. Nora's scientific training proved invaluable as she inventoried their resources, while Kethvar's analytical mind helped them prioritize immediate needs. They managed to recover emergency rations. For about 2 weeks, a portable shelter unit, basic medical supplies, and a few pieces of functional equipment. The water recycling unit is damaged but repairable, Kethvar reported, his 4 hands working with mechanical precision to assess the device. We will need to locate a water source within the next few days. As the alien sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of deep purple and gold, they activated the emergency shelter. The small dome provided protection from the elements and a sense of security, though both were keenly aware of how fragile their situation was. Inside the shelter's cramped confines, they sat across from each other, sharing a meal of reconstituted protein bars. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken fears and uncertainties. "I must confess something," Kethvar said suddenly, his voice softer than usual. "I have never been stranded before. Seltharians are careful people. We plan extensively, prepare for contingencies. This situation is challenging for me." Nora looked at him with new understanding. She had always admired his competence, the way he seemed to have every situation under control. To learn that he was as frightened and uncertain as she was created an unexpected moment of connection. "I've done plenty of field work," she admitted, "but never anything like this. Usually, I have a research team, supply drops, communication with the home base. This is," she gestured helplessly at their surroundings, "terrifying." Kethvar finished quietly. "Yes." Their eyes met across the small space, and for the first time since the crash, Nora felt something other than despair. They were different species, from different worlds, with different ways of thinking and being. But they were alive, and they were together, in this vast, empty universe that had to count for something. Outside the shelter, the alien night brought new sounds, distant calls from unknown creatures, the whisper of wind through strange vegetation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fears to face. But tonight, in the warm glow of their emergency lighting, Nora Blackwood and Kethvar began the long journey of learning to depend on each other in ways they had never imagined possible. The first chapter of their survival had begun, though. Neither could have predicted where that journey would ultimately lead them. 3 weeks had passed since the crash, and Nora was beginning to understand why ancient Earth poets wrote about the beauty of routine. Each morning, she woke to the gentle hum of Kethvar preparing their breakfast, his 4 hands moving with efficient grace as he portioned out their dwindling rations. The sound had become as comforting as it was necessary. Their days had settled into a rhythm born of survival. Mornings were for exploration and resource gathering, afternoons for maintenance and improvement of their shelter, evenings for planning, and increasingly for talking. The conversations had begun as practical exchanges of information, but had gradually evolved into something deeper. "Your people have an interesting relationship with time," Nora observed as she watched Kethvar carefully catalog the remaining supplies. His attention to detail was extraordinary, almost meditative. Kethvar's secondary arms continued sorting, while his primary hands made precise notes on their salvage tablet. Zeltharians believe that haste leads to error, and error leads to suffering. Better to spend additional time ensuring accuracy than to suffer the consequences of mistakes. Humans tend to be the opposite, Nora admitted, stretching out beside their morning fire. We're always rushing toward the next thing, the next discovery, the next achievement. Sometimes I think we forget to actually live in the moments we're creating. This was the kind of exchange that had become common between them. Where once they had been colleagues bound by professional courtesy, stranded together they had begun to share the deeper truths about their respective species and themselves. Kethver set down his tablet and regarded her with those large, dark eyes that seemed to hold depths of ancient wisdom. Perhaps this experience will teach us both to find balance. Your human urgency has already proven valuable in our survival efforts. It was true. Nora's instinct to act quickly had served them well when they needed to establish their water collection system before the last of their reserves ran out. Kethvar's methodical approach had ensured they built it correctly the first time, without wasting precious materials on repairs. Speaking of which, Nora said, rising and brushing dust from her clothes, I want to explore that valley we spotted yesterday. The vegetation looks different there. Denser, more diverse. Could mean water, maybe even edible plants. Kethver nodded, his gill-like breathing structures fluttering slightly in the morning breeze. I agree. However, I suggest we approach with caution. Dense vegetation often means predators. They had learned this lesson the hard way during their second week, when what appeared to be a harmless grazing animal had suddenly revealed rows of crystalline teeth and a decidedly aggressive disposition. Only Kethver's quick reflexes and surprising physical strength had saved them both from serious injury. The trek to the valley took most of the morning. Kepler 442c's longer day cycle meant they had more time for exploration, but it also meant longer periods of darkness to endure. Nora had discovered she actually preferred the extended days. They gave her more time to study the fascinating ecosystem around them. Look at this, she said, kneeling beside a cluster of what appeared to be flowers, though they moved with an almost animal-like awareness. The petals are tracking the sun, but they're also responding to our presence. Some kind of sensitivity to electromagnetic fields, maybe? Kethver crouched beside her, careful not to disturb the specimens. His people had enhanced senses, and she had learned to trust his ability to detect things she might miss. They appear to be communicating, he observed. See how the colors shift when one is touched? Nora gently brushed one of the flower-like structures and watched in fascination as a wave of color changes rippled through the entire cluster. Incredible. It's like they're sharing information about potential threats. Or perhaps they are simply curious, Kethver suggested, and there was something in his tone that made Nora look up at him. As we are. Their eyes met, and Nora felt a flutter of something she wasn't quite ready to name. During their weeks together, she had become increasingly aware of Kethver, not just as a survival partner, but as a person. The way he hummed softly while working, how he always ensured she ate before he did, the gentle patience with which he had taught her to read the subtle signs that indicated safe drinking water. The valley is just ahead, she said, standing perhaps a bit too quickly. The valley was everything she had hoped for and more. A small stream wound through its center, and the vegetation was lush and varied. Nora immediately began taking samples, while Kethver scouted the perimeter, his natural hunter's instincts keeping watch for dangers. Nora, his voice carried a note of urgency that made her look up from her samples. We have company. Moving through the undergrowth toward them was something that defied easy categorization. It was roughly the size of a large earth bear, but its hide seemed to shift and change like liquid metal. Most disturbing were its eyes, intelligent, calculating, and fixed directly on them. Back away slowly, Kethver murmured, positioning himself between Nora and the creature. Do not run unless I tell you to. The creature paused, tilting its head as if considering them. Then, without warning, it charged. Kethver moved with a speed and grace that reminded Nora why Zaltharians were so valued as navigators. Their reflexes were simply superior to most species. He caught the creature's initial assault, his forearms allowing him to grapple with it in ways that would be impossible for a human. But the creature was strong, and Kethver was already injured from the crash. Nora saw him faltering and did the only thing she could think of. She grabbed a large rock and brought it down hard on the creature's head. The beast roared and turned toward her, giving Kethver the opening he needed to strike a decisive blow. The creature collapsed, twitching once before going still. They stood panting in the sudden silence, adrenaline making them both shake. "Are you injured?" Kethver asked, his hands moving over her shoulders and arms in a quick but thorough examination. "I'm fine," Nora managed, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. "What about you?" "I will live," he said, but she could see the dark fluid that passed for blood among his people seeping through tears in his clothing. Without thinking, she reached out to examine his wounds, her hands moving gently over his damaged skin. Kethver went very still under her touch, his breathing structures fluttering in a pattern she had never seen before. "Nora," he said softly, and there was something in his voice that made her look up into his face. They were standing very close now, close enough that she could see the intricate patterns of darker blue that decorated his skin, close enough to notice that his eyes weren't purely black, but held flecks of deep purple, close enough to realize that somewhere in the past 3 weeks, her feelings for him had evolved into something far more complex than mere partnership. "We should get back," she said, stepping away. "Get those wounds treated." Kethver nodded, but she noticed he seemed reluctant to move away from her as well. "Yes, of course." The journey back to their shelter was quieter than usual, both of them lost in thoughts they weren't quite ready to voice. But that evening, as Nora carefully cleaned and bandaged Kethver's injuries, she found herself paying attention to details that had nothing to do with medical necessity. The way his skin felt warm and surprisingly soft under her fingers. How he held perfectly still to make her work easier, even when she knew it must hurt. The soft sounds he made when her touch found a particularly tender spot. "Your people," she found herself saying as she worked. "Do you? I mean, how do Zeltharians typically form relationships?" Kethver was quiet for so long that she wondered if he was going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. "We bond slowly over time. Trust must be established, compatibility proven. The process can take years. And relationships between different species?" Another long pause. "They are ... uncommon, not forbidden precisely, but ... challenging. The physiological differences, the cultural barriers, the question of whether true understanding is possible across such vast differences in biology and psychology." Nora finished with his bandages and sat back, studying his face. "Do you think it's possible? True understanding between different species?" Kethver's dark eyes met hers, and in them she saw a reflection of her own confusion and growing attraction. 3 weeks ago, I would have said no, he admitted. Now, I find myself reconsidering many things I once believed to be absolute truths. Outside their shelter, the night sounds of Kepler 442c created a symphony of alien music. Inside, 2 survivors from different worlds sat in comfortable silence, each wrestling with feelings that had no precedent in either of their cultures. Neither was ready to name what was growing between them, but both were beginning to understand that their survival would depend on more than just finding food and shelter. They were learning to depend on each other in ways that went far deeper than mere partnership, creating bonds that would be tested in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The storm had been building for days, turning the copper sky an ominous shade of dark bronze. Nora watched the approaching wall of clouds with growing unease as she and Kethvar worked to secure their camp. 2 months of survival had taught them to read Kepler 442c's weather patterns, and this storm promised to be unlike anything they had experienced. "The shelter won't hold against winds of this magnitude," Kethvar observed, his 4 hands methodically checking and rechecking their tie-downs. His gill structures were fluttering rapidly, a sign of stress that Nora had learned to recognize. "What about the cave system we found last week?" she suggested, securing their precious water collection equipment. "It's not ideal, but it would provide better protection." Kethver nodded, his dark eyes scanning the increasingly violent sky. "Agreed. We should move immediately." The trek to the caves was treacherous, with fierce winds already beginning to lash the landscape. By the time they reached the rocky outcropping that housed their refuge, both were exhausted and battered by flying debris. The cave was deeper than they had initially explored, extending back into the cliff face much further than their lights could penetrate. They established their temporary camp near the entrance, where natural light still filtered in, but they were protected from the storm's fury. As night fell and the storm reached its full intensity, the cave became their entire world. The howling wind outside created an almost constant roar, occasionally punctuated by the crash of falling trees or the rumble of distant landslides. "I've never felt so small," Nora admitted, sitting close to their small fire. The storm's violence made her acutely aware of how fragile their existence on this world really was. Kethver moved to sit beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his larger frame. "On Zelther, we have storms like this," he said, his melodic voice somehow soothing despite the chaos outside. "My grandmother used to tell me they were the planet's way of cleansing itself, preparing for new growth." "Your grandmother?" Nora turned to look at him, realizing she knew very little about his family. "She raised me after my parents died in an exploration accident," Kethver explained. His secondary arms moving in what she had learned was a gesture of remembered affection. She was a philosopher, always finding deeper meaning in natural phenomena. "I'm sorry about your parents," Nora said softly. "I can't imagine losing both parents so young." "And your family?" Kethver asked gently. "You speak of them rarely." Nora stared into the fire, feeling the familiar ache of homesickness. "My parents are both researchers, too. They'll be worried sick when they learn about the crash." "If they learn about it." She paused, swallowing hard. "I have a younger brother, Jamie. He always said I'd end up on some alien world, too curious for my own good." I guess he was right. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in memories of home. The intimacy of the small space and the storm's isolation created a bubble of privacy that felt separate from the rest of the universe. "Nora," Kethver said suddenly, his voice carrying a weight that made her look up at him, "I must tell you something that has been troubling me." Her heart began to beat faster. In the firelight, his blue skin seemed to glow with an inner radiance, and his dark eyes held depths of emotion that she was only beginning to understand. "What is it?" she asked, though part of her already knew. "These weeks together, they have changed me in ways I did not expect," he said carefully, as if each word was being chosen with great precision. "My feelings for you have grown beyond what should be possible between our species." The admission hung between them like a living thing. Nora felt her breath catch as she processed what he was saying, and what it meant for both of them. Double quotes, KETH single quotes VA are ... She began, but he held up one of his hands. "Please, let me finish," he said. "I know such feelings are inappropriate. Our cultures, our biology, everything about our situations makes this ... impossible. But I cannot deny what I feel. And I needed you to know." Nora stared at him, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he must be able to hear it. All the moments of growing closeness over the past months suddenly crystallized into clarity. The way he always ensured her comfort before his own. How his touch lingered when he helped her over difficult terrain. The soft expression in his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. "You think I don't feel it too?" she whispered. Kethver went very still. "Do you?" Instead of answering with words, Nora reached out and touched his face. her human hand tracing the elegant lines of his alien features. His skin was warm and surprisingly soft, with a texture unlike anything she had ever experienced. "I've been fighting it for weeks," she admitted, telling myself it was just isolation, just gratitude for saving my life. "But it's more than that, isn't it?" Kethver's eyes closed at her touch, and she heard a soft sound escape him, something between a sigh and a purr that resonated in frequencies she felt more than heard. "Much more," he agreed, his own hand coming up to cover hers where it rested against his cheek. The storm raged outside, but inside their cave sanctuary, time seemed suspended. Slowly, hesitantly, they moved closer together. The differences between them, her pale skin against his blue, her 5 fingers against his 6, her single pair of arms against his dual sets, only seemed to emphasize how miraculous it was that they had found each other at all. "This is madness," Nora breathed, even as she found herself unable to pull away from his touch. "Yes," Kethver agreed, his voice rough with emotion. "Complete madness." And then they were kissing, if it could be called that. Their physiologies were different enough that it took experimentation, gentle exploration, to find what worked for both of them. But when they did, the sensation was unlike anything Nora had ever experienced. There was warmth and gentleness, but also an electric connection that seemed to resonate through her entire nervous system. When they finally parted, both were breathing hard. "What are we doing?" Nora asked, though she made no move to create distance between them. "Something that probably violates every regulation both our species have about interspecies contact," Kethver replied. And there was something almost like humor in his voice. And I find I care less about regulations than I do about you." The simple honesty of his words broke down the last of her defenses. They came together again, more urgently this time, hands exploring the mysteries of each other's bodies with growing wonder and desire. Kethver, secondary arms allowed him to hold her with a completeness that was overwhelming, surrounding her with warmth and security, while his primary hands traced patterns of sensation across her skin that made her gasp and shiver. For Nora, every touch was a revelation. His skin was more sensitive than human skin, responding to even the lightest caress with visible color changes that painted shifting patterns across his body like a living aurora. Is this even possible?" she asked breathlessly during a moment of pause, suddenly concerned about the practical realities of their anatomical differences. "I believe so," Kethver said, his voice thick with desire, but also tinged with uncertainty. "There are differences, obviously, but Zeltharian physiology is more adaptable than most species realize." What followed was a night of gentle exploration and discovery. They moved slowly, carefully, learning each other's responses and limits with the same patience and attention to detail that had served them so well in their survival efforts. There were moments of awkwardness, times when their different biologies created challenges they had to work through together. But there were also moments of startling harmony, when their bodies seemed to understand each other in ways that transcended species barriers. When they finally lay together afterward, Nora's head pillowed on Kethver's broad chest. She could hear the dual rhythm of his hearts beating beneath her ear. His 4 arms wrapped around her in a cocoon of warmth and security that made her feel safer than she had since the crash. "What happens now?" she asked softly, trailing her fingers along the patterns of darker blue that decorated his skin. Kethver was quiet for a long moment, his hands stroking her hair with gentle reverence. "I do not know," he admitted. "This is unprecedented in my experience. In my culture's experience, as far as I know." "Mine too," Nora said. "Humans have had relationships with other species before, but they're rare. And usually not." She gestured vaguely at their intertwined bodies. "Not intimate," Kethver finished. "Yes." The storm continued to rage outside, but its violence seemed distant now, unable to touch the sanctuary they had created for themselves in the depths of the cave. "Do you regret it?" Nora asked, suddenly needing to know. Kethfer's arms tightened around her. "Never," he said with absolute certainty. "Whatever complications this creates, whatever challenges we must face, I could never regret this night with you." Nora smiled against his chest, feeling a contentment she hadn't experienced since childhood. "Good," she murmured, "because I love you, Kethfer. I know it's impossible and impractical and probably inadvisable, but I love you." "And I love you, Nora Blackwood," he replied, his voice resonating through his chest where her head lay. "With all my hearts, I love you." Outside, the storm began to weaken as dawn approached, but inside their cave, two beings from different worlds held each other close and marveled at the improbable miracle. They had found in each other's arms. The future remained uncertain, filled with questions about rescue, about what would happen when they returned to their respective civilizations, about whether what they had found together could survive the harsh realities of the larger universe. But for now, in this moment, none of that mattered. They had each other, and they had love, and in the vast loneliness of space, it felt like everything